What would you do if the cold, untouchable CEO of a billion-dollar company suddenly knelt down in front of you with a diamond ring, after weeks of risking his reputation just to protect you? This isn't just another office romance. This is the story of a woman who went from being accused and humiliated to standing at the altar with the man everyone thought was out of her reach. You won't believe how it all happened. If this story made your heart race, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next twist. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you say yes in Grace's place? And don't forget to share this video with someone who needs a little hope and inspiration today. The late autumn wind whipped through the streets of downtown Chicago, carrying with it the scent of rain and gasoline as the city lights blinked awake. Grace Miller tightened the thin scarf around her neck, her shoulders aching from a long day at Grant Dynamics. She was only 3 months into her first real job, an entry-level finance assistant, barely making enough to cover rent and groceries. But she moved with purpose, weaving through the crowd as if she were late for something far more important than herself. At 6:47 p.m., she pushed through the glass doors of a corner market, the kind where fluorescent lights buzzed overhead and the smell of bread hung heavy in the air. Grace didn't browse. She knew exactly what she needed: day-old bread at half price, small cartons of juice, a stack of discount granola bars. Her hands trembled as she counted the bills in her worn wallet. $23 left until next Friday. She took a sharp breath, pressed the bills against the counter, and whispered, "Bag them fast, please." The cashier gave her a puzzled look, but did as she asked. Grace shoved the bags against her chest, pushed through the door, and stepped back into the chilly night. Traffic roared past in a blur of headlights, but she didn't slow down. The sidewalk in front of Grant Dynamics was dark except for the dim glow of a street lamp, and the shapes waiting there. A frail man wrapped in a tattered army jacket looked up first. "Grace," he croaked, his voice hoarse with gratitude. His name was Sam, a veteran who had lost everything. Next to him, a young woman sat on a flattened cardboard box, hugging her knees to her chest. A couple of others shifted under thin blankets, their eyes following Grace, like children watching a miracle. Grace dropped to her knees on the cold concrete without hesitation. "I brought bread and juice tonight," she said softly, her breath clouding in the cold air. She handed Sam the first loaf, and his rough hands trembled as he clutched it. "God bless you," he whispered. The group leaned closer, their tired faces cracking into faint smiles. Laughter, light and genuine, spilled out into the night as they shared bites and stories. Grace didn't notice the icy pavement digging into her knees or the sting of wind against her cheeks. For those few minutes, nothing else mattered. But high above, in a corner office with a panoramic view, Ethan Grant stood still. The CEO of Grant Dynamics, known for his cold efficiency and relentless drive, rested his hands on the edge of his sleek mahogany desk. His meetings were over, his emails done, but something outside the glass wall caught his eye. At first, he thought she was just another passerby, but as the nights passed, he began to notice. Every single evening, the same young woman left the building, ducked into that market, and returned to the same shadowy group. No cameras, no charity banners, no one else watching, just her, kneeling on the sidewalk with a smile that made no sense in a world that demanded something in return. Ethan narrowed his eyes, leaning closer to the glass. The city hummed below, but his mind sharpened on that one image. A junior employee handing out bread to strangers like she'd done it 1,000 times. His jaw tightened. "What are you after?" he muttered under his breath, a mixture of curiosity and disbelief crawling through his chest. Grace, unaware of the man watching from above, laughed as Sam made a joke about his mismatched shoes. Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of voice that made strangers feel human again. She wiped her hands on her coat and looked at the group. "Same time tomorrow, okay?" The man in the tattered jacket nodded, his eyes glistening. As Grace stood and brushed the dirt from her knees, she glanced up at the towering glass building. For a brief second, she felt like someone was watching, but she shook the thought away and pulled her coat tighter, ready to walk back to her tiny apartment. Ethan didn't move from the window. He stayed there even after Grace disappeared into the crowd, his mind replaying the scene like a puzzle that refused to fit together. He had built an empire by predicting people's motives, by knowing exactly what they wanted. But this, a young woman giving away what little she had for nothing in return? It made no sense, and because it made no sense, Ethan Grant couldn't stop watching. The next evening, the office floor was nearly empty when Grace powered down her computer and tucked the last report into her worn leather bag. Her legs ached, her eyes burned from hours staring at spreadsheets, but she moved fast, eager to keep her promise on the sidewalk. She pushed through the revolving doors into the sharp Chicago night, gripping her scarf tighter against the cold. But this time, she didn't even make it past the lobby. A voice cut through the low hum of the building, deep, commanding. "Grace Miller." Her feet froze mid-step. She turned and saw him, Ethan Grant, standing near the glass wall, hands in his pockets, tailored suit catching the golden glow of the lobby lights. For a heartbeat, she thought she'd done something wrong. "Yes, Mr. Grant?" she asked, her tone cautious, her pulse thudding in her ears. Ethan didn't answer right away. He watched her with that sharp gaze people whispered about, the one that could strip excuses bare. Then, without preamble, he walked toward her. His polished shoes echoed against the marble floor, each step a warning and a pull at the same time. "You leave this building every night," he said, stopping just a few feet from her. "You buy things, bread, juice. Then you cross the street and hand them out like some secret mission." His voice was low, steady, almost accusing. "Why? What are you after?" Grace's mouth went dry. Her mind raced. This was the CEO, the man no one approached unless called upon. She could feel the receptionist at the front desk, staring, the security guard pretending not to listen. Grace swallowed hard. I'm not after anything," she said quietly. Ethan tilted his head, skeptical. "Everyone wants something, Ms. Miller. A raise, recognition, leverage." He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "So tell me, what do you get from them?" The air felt heavier, like the whole building was waiting for her to speak. Grace looked straight at him, her fingers tightening around the strap of her bag. For a moment, fear clawed at her chest. But then she thought of Sam's grateful eyes, the laughter of that young woman with the cardboard blanket, the way a simple sandwich could light up a tired face. Her voice came out soft, but it didn't shake. "Not everything needs a reason, Mr. Grant." Ethan's brow furrowed, as if he hadn't heard her right. She held his gaze, stronger this time. "Some things, you do them because you can, because someone has to." For the first time, his mask of certainty cracked. He didn't reply. He simply stared at her, something unreadable flickering behind those dark eyes. Then, without a word, he turned and walked toward the elevator, leaving Grace standing there, her heart hammering, her mind spinning. She exhaled slowly, clutching the bag of reports to her chest. As the elevator doors closed behind him, Ethan's jaw tightened. He didn't like puzzles he couldn't solve. And Grace Miller had just become the most intriguing puzzle of his life. The very next morning, Grace was halfway through sorting invoices when a message flashed across her screen. "Report to the 28th floor conference room." Immediately, her heart jumped. That floor was strictly for senior staff and executive meetings. She grabbed her notepad and hurried to the elevator, nerves buzzing under her skin. The room was already filled when she stepped in. Department heads sat around a long glass table, eyes glued to tablets and thick folders. And at the head of the table, Ethan Grant stood with his arms crossed, scanning the room like a general about to deliver orders. His eyes flicked to her. "Ms. Miller," he said, his voice cutting through the low murmur like a blade. "You'll join the operating cost review for the quarter? I want a full report ready for the board in 3 days." Grace froze, stunned. She wasn't part of any high-level team. Her throat went dry. "Sir, Ethan didn't let her finish. "You heard me." His tone left no room for argument. He looked to the others. Meeting adjourned. As chairs scraped back and murmurs rose, Grace stood rooted in place, clutching her notepad like a lifeline. When the room emptied, Ethan moved closer, lowering his voice just enough so only she could hear. You work late, you pay attention, and you don't complain, he said, his sharp gaze holding hers. Prove me right. Then he turned and left, leaving her in stunned silence. That afternoon, Grace sat at her small cubicle surrounded by mountains of data, numbers, spreadsheets, expense logs, pages and pages stacked high. She rubbed her eyes and whispered to herself, 3 days, how? But there was no time to doubt. She dove in, sorting through invoices, highlighting anomalies, cross-checking every figure. Hours passed in a blur. The office emptied, the janitors began their rounds, and still she worked, her fingers flying across the keyboard. By 10:30 p.m., she stood at the printer feeding in another batch of spreadsheets. Her eyes burned, but her determination only sharpened. She scribbled notes in the margins, reorganized charts, color-coded columns to make them clearer. When the printer jammed, she yanked out the crumpled paper with shaking hands and hit print again. She paced the floor with a pen clenched between her teeth, muttering figures under her breath, practicing aloud as if the board were already in front of her. On the second night, she dragged herself back to her tiny apartment after midnight, dropped her bag on the couch, and opened her laptop again. The glow of the screen filled the room. Her heartbeat raced as she rehearsed her explanation of the cost trends, her voice trembling but growing steadier with each try. She closed her eyes for a moment, exhaustion pulling at her, then forced them open. You can do this, she told herself. You have to. By the third morning, dark circles framed her eyes, but her report was shaping into something solid. Clean charts, concise points, a clear narrative. Sana. Friday arrived like a thunderclap. Grace stood outside the boardroom, clutching her report, her stomach twisting. She could hear voices inside, low and serious. Her palms were damp. Ready? A voice said behind her. She turned. It was Ethan, holding a coffee cup, his eyes steady on hers. She swallowed hard. I think so. He studied her face for a long second, then nodded. Good, let's go. The doors opened. Grace stepped inside, every eye turning toward her. Her legs felt heavy, her throat dry, but she placed the report on the table and began. Her voice was soft at first, but as she explained the numbers, the room quieted. Heads turned toward the chart she displayed. She pointed out unnecessary expenses, proposed solutions, answered questions with clarity she didn't know she had. Ethan sat back, arms crossed, his expression unreadable, but his eyes never leaving her. When she finished, the room was silent. For a heartbeat, Grace thought she had failed. Then one of the senior directors nodded slowly. Impressive work. A ripple of agreement spread across the table. Grace felt her chest tighten, a surge of relief washing through her. And for a split second, she caught Ethan's gaze. He didn't smile, but there was something new in his eyes. A flicker of approval, quiet but unmistakable. Grace exhaled, her hands still trembling under the table. But in that moment she knew, this challenge was only the beginning. The next Monday morning, Grace walked into the office with a cautious optimism still glowing from her presentation success. She stacked her reports neatly on her desk, trying to push away the exhaustion from the past 3 nights. She barely had time to sip her coffee before an urgent message popped up on her screen. Conference room 12, now. Her stomach tightened. That room was rarely used, except for high-stakes discussions. She grabbed her notebook and hurried down the hall, her heels clicking against the polished floor. When she pushed open the door, the atmosphere hit her like a wall. The finance director, Linda Cooper, sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 senior supervisors. Their faces were unreadable, but the stack of printed documents in front of them felt like a warning. Grace set her notebook down, glancing between them. "Is there a problem?" she asked, forcing her voice to stay calm. Linda folded her arms and slid a thick packet of papers across the table. "These are the reports you submitted for the board meeting last week." Grace nodded slowly. "Yes. Is something wrong?" Linda's tone sharpened. "Very wrong." She slammed a highlighted sheet onto the table, the sound echoing in the silent room. "These numbers, These revisions, do you deny making them? Grace stared at the page. The figures were twisted, totals inflated, deductions erased. Her heart thudded painfully. I didn't make these changes, she stammered. Linda leaned forward, her eyes cold. You expect us to believe that? You had access. You turned in the final version. Are you trying to sabotage our quarterly reports? Grace felt heat rush to her face, panic rising like a tide. No, I would never. Linda cut her off. You've been here, what, 3 months? And you think you can play games with executive data? Grace gripped the edge of the table. Her throat closed up. She flipped through the pages, scanning every line, but the numbers weren't hers. It didn't matter. All eyes were on her now, accusing, suspicious. This isn't me, she whispered, voice trembling. These aren't my edits. Linda's voice sharpened again, cutting through the air like a blade. Then who else would it be? Do you have an explanation? Grace opened her mouth, but no words came. She felt the weight of the room pressing down, the suffocating sense of being cornered. She could hear the blood rushing in her ears, her mind spinning for an answer that didn't exist. And then the door opened. Ethan Grant stepped in, his presence shifting the entire room. The executive straightened immediately, the air cracking with tension. He didn't sit. He didn't even glance at Linda. His eyes locked on Grace. Is there a problem? His voice was calm, but there was an edge under it, a sharpness that made the supervisors flinch. Linda cleared her throat. Mr. Grant, we've discovered discrepancies in the reports. Ms. Miller submitted altered figures. We're questioning her about it now. Ethan's eyes narrowed, shifting to the highlighted pages. He picked them up slowly, flipping through with deliberate care. Grace held her breath, unable to look away. Finally, he set the papers down, his gaze lifting to meet Linda's. And you're certain she did this? Linda hesitated, just enough to show a crack in her confidence. She was responsible for the final file. Ethan's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. Being responsible for submission is not the same as being responsible for tampering. He turned to Grace. Did you alter these numbers? Grace's voice broke as she answered, No, sir. I swear to you, I didn't. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His eyes stayed on her, unreadable, calculating. But there was something else there too, something that made Grace's chest tighten, a flicker of belief, faint but steady. He straightened and addressed the room, his tone clipped. Continue this meeting. Ms. Miller, step outside. Grace's legs felt heavy as she gathered her notebook and walked out. The door closed behind her with a soft click, but the sound rang in her ears like a gunshot. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her mind racing. Inside the room, Ethan's voice carried through, sharp and controlled. Before you accuse one of my employees again, you'd better have more than a hunch and a stack of papers. Grace closed her eyes, her hands trembling. The fear of losing everything gnawed at her. But somewhere deep inside, the way Ethan had looked at her moments ago lit a spark of hope. He didn't show it, but she knew he wasn't convinced of her guilt. And that thought was the only thing keeping her standing as she waited in that cold, silent hallway, wondering what would come next. The door to conference room 12 had barely closed behind Grace when Ethan turned back to the stunned faces inside. His tone was clipped, commanding. Bring me every access log for that file, he ordered. Now! The supervisor scrambled, fingers flying across keyboards as they pulled up the internal system. Linda shifted in her chair, her confident mask starting to crack. Ethan didn't sit. He paced slowly behind them, his presence heavy in the room. Who had editing rights? He asked sharply. One supervisor cleared his throat. All senior staff in finance, and Ms. Miller, for the final submission. Ethan's gaze cut to him like a knife. List them, one by one. I want timestamps. Within minutes, data filled the screen. Time-stamped edits, login records, keystroke histories. Ethan leaned over, scanning quickly. There, he said, tapping a line on the monitor. That's not her login. The supervisor stammered. That's Linda's credential. Linda's face went pale. That's impossible. I never... Ethan's voice hardened, low and dangerous. Then explain why your ID accessed the file at 2:13 a.m. last Thursday. The room fell silent. No one moved. Ethan's eyes locked on Linda's. Explain. Linda's lips parted, but nothing came out. She looked down, flipping papers, as if the truth might be hiding there. Ethan stepped closer, his tone dropping even lower. You accused someone in front of me, he said slowly, and you didn't even think I'd check. One of the supervisors spoke hesitantly. Mr. Grant, I think we should double-check before... Ethan raised a hand. Do it. He turned to the other supervisor. Pull the backup logs from IT. I want camera feeds outside the finance office. The man jumped up and left the room, returning minutes later with a flash drive. On the screen, grainy footage played. 2:10 a.m., the finance office door opening. Linda Cooper stepped inside, alone, looking over her shoulder. The timestamp matched perfectly. A stunned silence followed. Linda's hands trembled as she grabbed her papers. This is taken out of context. Ethan's voice cracked like a whip. Enough. He straightened, looking around the table. Effective immediately, Ms. Miller's suspension is lifted. You will issue her a formal apology by the end of today. He turned to Linda, his expression ice cold. And you will step aside while I review your access history. Don't move until I say otherwise. Linda opened her mouth, but Ethan cut her off with a glare that froze her in place. Meeting dismissed, he said, his voice final. Out in the hallway, Grace jolted upright when the door opened. Ethan stepped out, holding the same stack of papers she'd been accused over. His eyes met hers, steady and unwavering. You're clear, he said simply. Grace blinked. What? I've reviewed the logs. You didn't touch those numbers. His tone softened, just a fraction. You've been vindicated. Relief crashed over her so fast her knees almost buckled. She pressed a hand to her chest, feeling the tension finally break. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick. Ethan's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. Get back to work, Grace, he said quietly, and hold your head high. She nodded, her heart pounding with a rush of gratitude and pride. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt the weight lift off her shoulders. She turned and walked back to her desk, and this time, she didn't care who was watching. Inside the conference room, whispers began to ripple through the remaining staff. Outside, Grace allowed herself the smallest smile. She had survived the storm, and as she slid back into her chair, the glow from her monitor reflecting in her eyes, one thought burned clear and strong. They tried to bring me down, but I'm still standing. After that day, something changed in the air around Grace. When she walked back into the office the next morning, people looked at her differently. A few nodded with respect. Some even whispered congratulations for handling herself well. But none of that compared to what she noticed from him. Ethan. It started small. That night, as she bundled her coat and stepped outside into the freezing wind, she heard a low voice behind her. Grace. She turned, and there he was, leaning casually against his sleek black car parked right by the curb. The glow from the streetlights cast long shadows, but his eyes were steady on hers. It's late, he said simply. Get in. I'll take you home. Grace froze. Her first instinct was to refuse. This was her CEO, not a friend. Mr. Grant, I can manage. You've been managing too much lately. His tone was calm, but final. He stepped around and opened the passenger door himself. Get in. Her heart thudded. The wind bit through her thin coat, and despite every reason screaming no, her body moved. She slid into the passenger seat, feeling the warmth of the heater against her frozen fingers. The car purred as Ethan pulled out onto the main road. For the first few blocks, silence filled the space between them. Grace kept her eyes on the city lights streaking past the window, telling herself to stay composed. But then his voice broke the silence. You didn't sleep much last week, did you? Grace blinked, startled. I managed. You look exhausted, he said, his eyes still on the road. But you still came in early. You still helped them, after everything. Grace gripped her bag tighter. Those people on the sidewalk, they don't have anyone else. Ethan shot her a quick glance, something unreadable flickering across his face. Then he focused on the road again, his fingers tightening briefly on the steering wheel. Most people wouldn't bother. Grace didn't know what to say. There was a weight in his voice, a quiet sincerity she hadn't expected. She stared out the window, her heartbeat drumming in her ears. When they pulled up outside her apartment building, he didn't just let her go. He waited, his gaze meeting hers once more in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Next time, don't walk alone in the cold," he said softly. "Call me." Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest, unsettling, but undeniable. "Thank you, but you don't have to." "I know what I don't have to do," he cut in, his tone lighter, but still firm. "Good night, Grace." She stepped out of the car, feeling the heat of his words linger long after the door closed. As she walked up the steps to her building, she couldn't shake the strange flutter in her chest. The days that followed carried that same subtle shift. Ethan passed by her desk more often now, sometimes just to ask about a report, sometimes for no reason at all. His sharp eyes softened when they landed on her, and she caught herself stealing quick glances back. One afternoon, while she organized invoices, she felt his presence before she saw him. "Grace," he said from behind her. She turned, heart leaping. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course." He handed her a folder. "Your analysis on last quarter's costs. It was better than some of the senior teams. Keep it up." Her fingers brushed his when she took the folder, and the smallest jolt of electricity shot up her arm. She quickly looked down, trying to hide the color rising in her cheeks. He noticed. She could feel it in the way his gaze lingered a second longer than necessary before he turned and walked away. Grace exhaled shakily. She was grateful, confused, and something else she didn't dare name. Because he was Ethan Grant, the CEO, the man everyone in the company whispered about. Untouchable and miles above her world. And yet, as the days stretched on, as his car kept pulling up to the curb at night, and his quiet words kept finding their way into her thoughts, Grace felt the distance shrinking. She didn't understand why. She didn't know where it would lead. But every time his eyes met hers, every time he said her name in that low, steady voice, something deep inside her shifted. Soft, dangerous, and impossible to ignore. The morning started like any other, until Grace stepped out of the elevator and felt the weight of 100 eyes on her. Conversations halted mid-sentence. A few employees quickly looked away. Others didn't bother hiding their smirks. Her heartbeat kicked up as she crossed the open floor. Something was wrong. At her desk, two junior analysts whispered hurriedly over their phones. One of them glanced at her, then lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. Grace dropped her bag and opened her laptop. Her screen lit up, and then her breath caught. There it was, splashed across a gossip site that someone had pulled up on the company's internal feed. Ethan Grant, CEO of Grant Dynamics, spotted having an intimate dinner with a mystery woman. The photo was grainy, taken from across the street. But there was no denying it. It was her. Sitting at a dimly lit restaurant table, her face half turned toward Ethan, a faint smile on her lips. Grace felt her stomach twist. Her hands hovered above the keyboard. The whispers around the office grew louder. Who is she? She must be someone important. Or someone trying to get ahead. Her cheeks burned. She had done nothing wrong. Dinner after a long day wasn't a crime. But the tone in their voices stung. She shut her laptop, her pulse thundering in her ears. By noon, the buzz had grown into a storm. People peeked over cubicles, speculating. Every time she stepped into the hallway, the conversation stopped just long enough to confirm her suspicions. Grace kept her head down, trying to focus on a report. But her vision blurred with frustration. Why did he take me there? Why didn't I say no? Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Just 3 words. My office, now. Grace swallowed hard and stood, feeling every eye follow her as she walked to the elevator. Her heels clicked sharply against the marble floor, each step echoing louder than the last. When she entered Ethan's office, he was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, jaw tight. "You've seen it," he said without turning. She nodded slowly. "They're talking. Everyone's talking." "Let them," he replied, his tone calm but edged with steel. "This isn't just about me," she blurted out. "They think I'm—" Her voice broke. That I'm using you. Ethan turned then, his dark eyes locking onto hers. Are you? No. The word came out sharp, desperate. Then stop worrying about what they think. His voice rose just enough to make her flinch. Then he moved closer, his expression softening slightly. Grace, I don't care what they say. I care about the truth. Her hands trembled at her sides. But they're making it impossible to work. I can't even walk down the hall without hearing. He cut her off. Then we'll end it. Her heart stopped. End what? He turned toward the door and pressed the intercom. Call a company-wide meeting in 5 minutes. Grace's eyes widened. Ethan, no. You don't have to. Yes, he said firmly. I do. 5 minutes later, the main conference area was packed. Dozens of employees filled the room, whispers bouncing off the walls like static. Grace stood off to the side, her hands clasped tightly, feeling exposed, vulnerable, ready to bolt. Ethan walked in, straight-backed and unshaken, and stepped up to the front. The whispers died instantly. His gaze swept the room, sharp and unwavering. I've heard the chatter, he began, his voice cutting through the silence. Some of you have seen a photo and decided to turn it into a story. A ripple moved through the crowd. Grace's breath caught. Ethan's eyes hardened. Grace Miller is an employee of this company. She has done nothing but work tirelessly for our success. And if anyone has an opinion about her character, her ethics, or her place here, he paused, his voice dropping lower, more dangerous. You can take it up with me. Directly. Right now. The room froze. No one moved. No one spoke. Ethan let the silence stretch, his eyes sweeping across every face. Then he stepped back. That's what I thought. Meeting over. The crowd dispersed in stunned silence. Grace stood rooted in place, her chest tight with a flood of emotions. Shock, relief, and something deeper she couldn't name. As the last of the staff filed out, Ethan approached her. He didn't smile, but his voice softened. Now they know where I stand, he said quietly, and so should you. Grace felt a lump rise in her throat. Why would you do that for me? He looked at her for a long moment, his answer simple and steady. Because you deserve it. Her heart raced as he turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, feeling the weight of his words settle in, a warmth she hadn't felt in years, and a spark that refused to go out. 3 weeks passed after that company-wide meeting, but the memory of Ethan's words still echoed in Grace's mind every night. She closed her eyes. Now they know where I stand, and so should you. Work moved on, reports and meetings came and went, but something unspoken hung between them. Every time Ethan passed her desk, her heart raced. Every time their eyes met in the hallway, she felt that pull again. Soft, dangerous, impossible to ignore. So when her phone buzzed late one Friday evening with a message that made her breath catch, she knew everything was about to shift. Be ready at 7. I'm sending a car. No explanation, no signature, but she knew who it was. The ride took her to the quiet edge of the city, where lights from skyscrapers faded into the night sky. The car stopped in front of a small, private restaurant she had never seen before, its warm glow spilling onto the sidewalk. A host greeted her by name and led her through a candle-lit corridor to a secluded room in the back. Her breath caught as she stepped inside. The table was set with soft white linens, golden plates, and a single vase of wildflowers. Candles flickered everywhere, casting dancing shadows across the walls. It was intimate, almost unreal. And there he was, Ethan, already standing by the table, his dark suit sharp against the soft glow, his eyes fixed on her as if she were the only person in the world. You came, he said quietly. Grace tried to steady her voice. You didn't give me much of a choice. He smiled faintly and pulled out her chair. Dinner passed in a blur of conversation and laughter she didn't expect. He asked about her favorite childhood memories. She teased him about his obsession with schedules. They spoke like old friends, and yet beneath every word was a charge neither of them could ignore. When dessert arrived, Ethan didn't touch his plate. Instead, he stood, sliding his chair back slowly, and reached into the pocket of his jacket. Grace frowned, confused, until she saw the small, black velvet box in his hand. Her heart stopped. Ethan took a deep breath, then stepped around the table and sank to one knee on the soft carpet. Grace's hands flew to her mouth as the room seemed to shrink down to just the two of them and the steady pounding of her heart. "Grace Miller," he began, his voice low but steady. "I built my life believing nothing mattered except success. I thought people always wanted something from me. I thought kindness was a weakness." He looked up at her, eyes shining in the candlelight. "But you've turned everything I believed upside down." Her eyes blurred with tears, her chest rising and falling fast. "You gave when you had nothing. You stood tall when they doubted you. You made me see there's more to life than numbers and power." His voice cracked slightly, raw and real. "Grace, you've changed my world, and I don't ever want to go back." He opened the box, revealing a delicate diamond ring that caught the light and sent it scattering across the room. "Will you marry me?" For a heartbeat, Grace couldn't move. She felt every emotion crash over her: shock, joy, disbelief, and a rush of warmth that left her breathless. A tear slipped down her cheek as she nodded, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Yes, yes, Ethan." He slid the ring onto her finger, stood, and before she could say another word, he pulled her into his arms. The kiss they shared was gentle, but full of everything they had never said aloud. Months later, the church doors swung open to a soft spring breeze. Grace walked down the aisle in a gown that shimmered with every step. Ethan waited at the altar, standing tall, his eyes locked on hers. As they joined hands, the world seemed to melt away. The vows were spoken through smiles and tears, and when the officiant finally declared, "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Ethan didn't wait. He kissed her, strong and sure, as applause and cheers filled the room. Grace laughed against his lips, tears streaming freely as she felt the crowd rise to their feet in celebration. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the whispers, not the doubts, not the past. Only this, only him. Only them, standing together, beginning a new chapter, full of love, full of hope. In life, the smallest acts of kindness can create the biggest changes, not only for others, but for yourself. Grace's journey reminds us that staying true to your values, even when no one notices, can open doors you never imagined. She didn't help others to gain recognition. She helped because it was the right thing to do. And when challenges came, her integrity became her shield. For anyone between 18 and 45 trying to navigate work, relationships, or personal growth, remember this: your character speaks louder than your position, your paycheck, or the rumors around you. Stay consistent, stay compassionate, and opportunities will find you, even in the most unexpected ways. If this message resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss our next powerful story.